Okay, Jake. So I want to keep going through this book and just kind of going point by point. So he talks about Christianity is a testable faith. And this is very important to his whole thesis that he's got a bunch of evidence and that he can prove that we can test claims of Christianity. I think Mormonism also has very similar ideas that they can prove that Mormon is true. They've got all the evidence, the three witnesses, the eight witnesses. They've got the Book of Mormon itself. Muslims also take a very, I've heard debates and lectures. They also take a very scholarly view, and they see themselves as following the truth, following the evidence. So this is not a unique claim that he's at. But I'm going to go through his book piece by piece. So he talks about clearing the fog of expectations, and he's going to start with misconceptions. So his first misconception is that Christianity doesn't need evidence because faith is blind. And he finds this to be, not how he feels about his own belief. He feels that it's very evidential, maybe not enough to prove it 100%, but it's enough to give space for it. And I do agree with that idea. We don't always have to prove everything. What I disagree with is when we actually have evidence that goes counter to what a faith tradition is saying, then we have to respect the evidence. We can dig into it, but we really have to respect it. And I feel like that's where I think a lot of these things fall apart. Because when people don't respect the evidence, they just deny it or make unreasonable claims against it to deny it. His next misconception is that Christianity cannot be true because the church has committed injustices. And I actually agree with his concern here. The fact that the Catholic Church or any church has done things which are immoral or unjust does not prove that the underlying truth claims are false. We're all human, we make mistakes, and so our actions does not prove or disprove any given faith tradition. However, he is trying to have it a little bit both ways. And what I mean by that is, we just heard in the introduction how he, gave the story about his own life changing, his father's life from alcoholism changing with the acceptance of the Christian faith. So on one hand, he is pegging the acceptance of Christianity, letting it work in your heart, becoming a new creature in Jesus. He's promoting this idea that all these miraculous changes can and should be expected, and then he wants to have it the other way when he says, "Yeah, but you can't judge the church by you can't judge the faith by the actions of its members." So he is trying to have it both ways. The next misconception is that the hypocrisy of Christians undermines the reasonability of the Christian faith. And this is similar to the previous claim. People acting counter to their beliefs does not prove that the beliefs are incorrect. And I agree. Misconception number 4, the intolerance of Christians is a good reason to reject Christian faith. It's a similar argument. It's a variation on the theme. Christians can become very judgmental and arrogant in their belief systems. You can see that very well, or I can see it much easier in Mormonism, which I'm more familiar with. But we have family members you can probably think of who are very, very judgmental and very unpleasant to be around because of their harsh criticism and their self-righteousness and their arrogance and patting themselves on the back. So I do believe that these types of religions have a tendency to promote that Pharisaism or way of thinking. But to be honest, people of other traditions also exhibit similar tendencies. So whether we're talking about the political spectrum of left and right, you will have people on both sides who become very judgmental and harsh critics of the other side. So I think this is more of a human tendency than it is any real mark against religion per se. So I do agree with his overall position that hypocrisy doesn't mean the church isn't true or the gospel isn't true. He made an interesting comment within this whole discussion about hypocrisy and beliefs, strong beliefs. He said, broadening the point a bit, who in their right mind doesn't consistently think that they are right? And I think that is very true. That is the part that gets to the nature of humanity. We all always think that we're right, and it's only those who make a very concerted effort to be open-minded, to look at the evidence, to be humble, to realize that we have these biases and tendencies. And I consider myself one of those. I do make a very strong effort to be open-minded, but I still do tend to think I'm right too. So that's a very human characteristic. The next misconception is there can't be just one right religion. There obviously can be just one right religion. Problem with that is that there, I tend to agree with the misconception, what he labels as a misconception. Given the state of the world that we live in, and we look around and we see many devout, sincere people in many different faiths, all believing that they're correct, and so yes, I do tend to agree that there cannot just be one correct religion in this world that we live in. It just doesn't fit with the reality that I see. But to the other side of the point, if there was a God who was saying and doing all these things, which people tend to say that God does and says, then that would be the expectation, is that there is one correct religion. So within this category, he goes into some things that I want to dive in a bit deeper. It says Christ himself offers the only way to be reconciled with God. My problem with this statement is that it has a presupposition, which is that we are in a situation where we need to be reconciled with God. And I actually don't agree with that at all. I see our life here on earth as a situation that's similar to when I send my kids off to college and they leave my home, they're out on their own. Their influence with me is much more distant than it was when they were living in my house. And my only contact with them may be a phone call here or there. And I didn't send them out into the world or to the university because they needed to be reconciled with me. I sent them off to learn and to grow and to progress more than what they could living at my house, relying on me and being totally dependent. So this is not about some great wrong needs to be righted so they can come back. And that's how I view it with God. We came from God to here on earth, and when we die, we'll return. And there's in my mind, there's not a reconciliation that needs to occur. Um, he says the resurrection of Jesus is God's decisive proof that Jesus is not just a great religious teacher among all the religious teachers in history. It is God's sign that Jesus is not a religious charlatan. The resurrection is God's way of pointing to Jesus and saying that he is the one in whom we are to believe. So I disagree again. I can understand why he puts this emphasis on it, but I do not agree with what he's gotten, which he will get to down the future, which is how darn provable the resurrection is. I do not find the resurrection to be high grade quality evidence. I find it to be very flimsy evidence. So to say that the resurrection is God's proof, and that this is what He's showing everybody, that they need to believe in this God as opposed to the other gods, I just find that to be very, very, very flimsy evidence for God to try to hang everything on. Find that to be very godlike. It's very frail, very human, very weak. All right, his next misconception: Christianity and science are at war. Now, I would not say that I disagree with this misconception. I would say I tend to be on the side of the misconception. They are at war and have been for many years. An early example of that would be Galileo. He looks through his telescope and he sees something that contrasts with what the then current teachings of the church were about the universe. And so, yes, he was placed under house arrest. He was called a heretic, etc. So, science is often in conflict with religion because science will come up with something which is at odds to religion, and then people are forced to be in that uncomfortable situation where they have to deny one or the other. And so, yes, there is frequent conflict, and it tends to all boil down to things that were said in the Bible or in the sacred scriptures or sacred works if you're a Muslim, something that counters with something scientific, which counters with something that you have in the words that are seen to be as coming from God. So the conflict is because of the things that are written in the books, but it definitely exists. He makes the further claim that Christianity was essential for the rise of science. I find that to be ridiculous claim. Uh, Science has advanced in other cultures that weren't Christian. Got scientific advances coming out of Islam, out of the Far East, China, uh, Japan. Just the idea that you have to be Christian to advance science is ridiculous. He says there are some beliefs that individual Christians hold that are in tension with modern science, but this is only shallow conflict. So basically, this is similar to the Mormon teaching that, the science is, is incorrect, and true science will come to support and show that these teachings that we've been taught by the prophets are true. It's the same idea. He says no real conflict between theism and science exists. I would agree with that at a very, very deep fundamental level. True theology and true science are not going to be in conflict. So when you find something that is in conflict, you have to reject one or the other. It's either bad science, which does exist, or it's false interpretation of what God is, which is also, I believe, present in the Bible and in the other holy works of other religions, Mormon, Muslim, etc. So, anyways, next misconception: God has not provided enough evidence for rational belief. I am strongly in favor of this statement that he labels as a misconception. The evidence is inadequate. We are left in a situation where believing things that the scriptures say based on the fact that they're in the scriptures is the only way, because they are in conflict with what we've gathered in science and what we can see from our own eyes around the world. So I agree with this misconception. He makes the statement, while God has not provided exhaustive knowledge of his existence, he has given sufficient knowledge for those with an open heart and mind. This is an excuse. This is actually an acknowledgement that the evidence is thin and insufficient. And so it gives a way out to blame those who disagree, those who lean more towards the science sort of things, with not being open In Mormonism, you get similar things. You wanted to sin, never really had a testimony. You weren't willing to make the sacrifices, blah, blah, blah. All it is it's making an excuse for the fact that there is really limited evidence. These are faith-based positions. They're not science or logic or rational. We want to be logic. We have to accept that there's just not much there. Now, there's a couple things here which he says next that I really strongly disagree with. And I'm going to read them and then go back and discuss them. He says, it is actually a matter of relative indifference to God whether people believe that he exists or not. For what God is interested in is building a love relationship with us, not just getting us to believe that he exists. Even the demons believe that God exists, and they tremble, for they have no saving relationship with him. Of course, in order to believe in God, we must believe that God exists. But there is no reason at all to think that if God were to make his existence more manifest, that more people would come into a saving relationship with him. All right, so there's a whole bunch to unpack here, and which I disagree with on many levels. So first is this idea that God doesn't care, that God's indifferent as to whether people believe that he exists or not. There is one possible way in which I think that this could actually be true, that God doesn't care. That would be actually in the system which I kind of believe may actually exist, and that is that God doesn't care, because the plan that he has for us here on this earth does not have any basis in whether we believe in a religion or this religion or that religion or no religion. It just has to do with the facts that we're here, we're experiencing life, we grow up in imperfect families, we are imperfect ourselves, we marry and fall in love with imperfect people, we have imperfect children, we suffer from pain of all sorts, poor health, we experience all manner of joys and pleasures, and in the end we struggle with our declining health and learn to again rely on others and accept the help that comes when we're infirm and we must rely on others. And so there's just so many lessons packed into life that we can learn in no other way. We taste the bitter so that we can prize the sweet. And so that's actually how I tend to view the world now, is that we're all here, we're all experiencing it. The plan of God is in action in every single person's life. And so in that scenario, then God could very well be indifferent as to whether we believe or disbelieve. But what he's tying it to is a different idea. And he's tying this God doesn't care to this idea that what God really wants is for us to develop this close, intimate, loving, personal relationship with him. And that just mere belief is meaningless. The devil's belief. So who cares if people believe? What he really wants is that we have this deep, loving relationship with him. So again, I find this to be very deeply troubling and problematic. I disagree with this notion. One of my biggest reasons for disagreeing with it is that I spent many years in a devout faith tradition, and it wasn't this particular faith tradition, but it definitely was a religion that believed in Jesus and believed that his sacrifice was important for my sins. I tried deeply over many years to pray and connect with God, with Jesus, with the divine. Yes, I believed in Mormonism and other prophets, but I didn't see them as my salvation. I believed, even at that point, that it was through Jesus that the sacrifice of his atonement was made, and I had to have this relationship with God. I remember very early in my life feeling this need to have a relationship with God. My sister, Arlene, used to have a really powerful testimony that she would bear of her relationship with Jesus. And I felt that I didn't have that close relationship. I tried to have that relationship with him from a very early age. And for my farewell, when I went on my mission, my sister Arlene and I sang together, "How Great Thou Art," um, which is a very popular Christian hymn, and something that's still touching and meaningful to me today. So very early in my life, I was making efforts to try to um, be closer to Jesus and have a relationship with Him. That never really happened for me. I never had anything where I could really say that Jesus developed a relationship with me. And as a born again Christian, you can say, "Oh, well, you didn't believe in Jesus the right way." To me, that's bogus. I gave it my all, and it didn't work. It didn't work. So this idea that God wants a relationship with us, that's His primary thing, this doesn't fit with my own personal experience. Moreover, as I think about it just logically and try to assess life and compare it to other people that I see here, and also to compare it to what I said about when I send my kids off to school. I'll send my kids off to school so that I can develop a relationship with them. If I wanted to develop my relationship with them further, I'd keep them home with me and we'd talk every day and do things together on a regular basis where we see each other and talk face to face and blah, blah, blah. That's not what happens. I send them off to school because they need time away from me to where they can figure out who they are and grow and develop. And this is vital. That's how I see our relationship with God. There's nothing there that needs to be fixed. He doesn't want me to be on my knees praying all day, trying to create some imaginary connection with Him, which is something that I did through much of my life. Tried to have that connection, tried to have that sense that He's there and He's intimate with me in my life. I never successfully developed that. And it doesn't logically make sense to me that that's what He wants. We're here to live life, to go out and taste the bitter and taste the sweet, realize there's a difference. So it doesn't make sense to me. This whole thing that's His primary objective, I don't buy it. And then he goes on to say, there's no reason to think that if God were to make His existence more manifest, that more people would develop this type of relationship with Him. Again, I disagree. If this were actually how it was supposed to work, and God actually cared that He had this plan, that He wanted us to know about Him, that He wanted us to develop that relationship with Him, I think it is ludicrous to say that more people wouldn't be successful at this if He didn't make it evident. We have Muslims and Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses and Seventh-day Adventists and Buddhists and Hindus and everybody and very sincere, changing their life according to the structures that they categorize themselves into, trying to have this relationship with God and being unsuccessful to a large degree. If Jesus, God, really wanted this and really wanted to have that develop with His children that He loves, yes, I think He would make it more apparent. And it's a big problem to me that He does not, and that it's not more obvious. So I disagree fundamentally with this idea. He gets into talking about free creatures at this point, and I actually do agree with the free creatures aspect. It's vitally important that we have freedom. If God made us, but then made us so that we couldn't do anything other than follow Him, then we wouldn't be free. So we have to be able to have this ability to believe or disbelieve, to follow or not to follow. And so I do agree with that free belief aspect of what he's talking about here. All right, next misconception. Being a good person is enough to get to heaven. So this strikes again at the core of my own experience with Mormonism. I probably have told you this story before, so it may not be that impactful to you. But again, it's something that's been very important to me in my life. Um, so it was after you had gone on your mission and I had left the church, but I was still trying to be a good Mormon. I was still trying to keep what I felt was the promise that I'd made to your mom, that I would be in the church and be active. Now that I disbelieved, it was a real quandary to me as to what was I supposed to do. I didn't actually feel this church was true, but I made a promise to her that I would be active for my whole life. And, it was one thing to make that promise when I believed that it was true, but now that I didn't, she'd still entered the marriage with me, believing that that's how I would act. So I was trying to act that way because I felt like that was my moral obligation. So I was attending church, and I was still wearing my garments, and I was still having family prayers and family scripture reading. Um, my family meeting lessons had changed a bit. I had come to make a greater emphasis on what I thought were moral principles and values rather than necessarily Sunday school book lessons. But I was still engaging in these types of things. I had quit paying tithing. I was still faithful to your mom at that point. I had not cheated. Um, so in all respects other than tithing, I could still pass the Temple Recommend interview. Well, except for I didn't believe. But as far as my life and my actions, I was still doing what I was supposed to be doing. Um, and then it was time to baptize Allie, and that was important to me. I wanted to do it. I saw the value of being able to connect with my child, to do this, spiritual act that had some significance in her lives about our commitment to, be a good person and follow the Lord. And even though I didn't really believe in Jesus or the resurrection or the Son of God, virgin birth type things, I still believed that he was a good example. And I had set an appointment to talk with the bishop and ask his permission to see what he would say if I could baptize Allie. I expected that he was going to tell me no, but still, I made an appointment and I made a plan to talk to him. And that Sunday, before I talked to him in sacrament, I was sitting there singing the songs, and the sacrament hymn was one that was about Jesus. I don't remember which one it was, but it was about Jesus. I was touched by it, and I remember those thoughts going through my mind of I don't really even believe in Jesus, but I believe in this message. I believe in what he stood for. And when you think about the Christmas season, the love and giving that comes out of that, I felt like that message is something I believe in. It's part of who I am. And so, anyways, I talked to the bishop and I told him, I said, I don't believe, that, Bishop. We've talked about this. I don't believe in the church anymore. I don't believe in the restoration of the priesthood. I don't believe in the priesthood at all. But I would like to baptize my daughter. Can I baptize my daughter? And he said no. And that hurt more than I expected. Didn't really expect it to hurt. I already expected the answer to be no. But when he told me no, it really did hurt. And I realized at that point that what mattered most to the church, despite all the things that are taught about, we're saved by grace after all that we can do and how important it is that we live righteous lives, that all that was just fluff. That what it really boiled down to at the end of the day was that I had to believe the correct things. I had to believe the Joseph Smith story. I had to believe that Jesus appeared to Joseph Smith again and restored the church. If I didn't believe that, it didn't matter that I was a good person. It only mattered that I believed the correct doctrine. So this type of dogmatism is not just found in the Mormon church. This is found in all churches. In Islam, if a person leaves the faith, sometimes their family members will kill them because of this disrespect to the family and disrespect to God. Um, Muslims are taught to kill non-believers. So this is not just Mormon. And here we see right here in this book, he's doing a darn good job of teaching this doctrine right here. I'll read just a couple excerpts that show that this is exactly what he's teaching. He says, when we say we are bad, the wrath of God seems a barbarous doctrine. As soon as we perceive our badness, it appears inevitable, a mere corollary from God's goodness. And that's from C.S. Lewis. This author goes on to say, the Bible has a very stark view of human nature. He says, we have utterly rebelled against our Creator. We are deeply affected by sin. Kind of skipping a little bit here. Thus, God doesn't send good people to hell. There is no such thing as a good person. A little bit further on, he quotes another person who made an extensive study of the evils in the world, and his conclusion was, humankind is desperately wicked. So that's his view of humanity. We are wretched, deplorable creatures, and without the intervention of God, we are going to go to hell, and we deserve it because we're just that wretched. And he then quotes the scripture, which is a famous passage you'll recognize. It's from John, and it confirms that he's not wrong. He's saying what the scripture says. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. For God did not send his Son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. He who believes in him is not condemned, but he who does not believe is condemned already, because he has not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. So it's the same exact doctrine. It doesn't matter whether you've lived a good life. It doesn't matter how hard you've tried to be good. It only matters that you believe the correct thing. And, according to them, it's that you believe right here that Jesus is the Son of God, the only begotten Son. You have to believe that. That's the key. If you believe it and you accept it, you're done. You're good. Truth is, in my opinion, that yes, humankind has a dark side. We all individually have a darkness within us. We also all have a beautiful side within us. Maybe there's some psychopaths who don't. I don't know. I haven't been a psychopath. But for my own heart and my own nature, I have some beautiful qualities and I have a dark side as well. I have contemplated doing some pretty heinous things that I would be pretty ashamed to let people know that I'd contemplated. And I've done some of those things. As you know, I've cheated on my wife, broke a promise there that I wish I'd never broken. So there is a goodness and a darkness within all of us. But we're exactly the way God created us. He created us this way. In the image of God, it says. So why would God make something that's so vile that it's so reprehensible? In my opinion, he didn't. There's beauty and darkness mixed together. And the human task that each and every one of us face is to integrate the light and the darkness into one being. And that path is going to involve some mistakes and some learning and some pain and some sorrow. It's going to be tasting that bitter and that's sweet, and learning which one to prize, and learning to integrate our shadow into ourself and become a fully integrated person. And how we do that, and the manner in which we do that, has got to matter for something. And to say that it doesn't, and that only what matters is that you believe in the correct doctrine, and then God's going to somehow do some magical work in your heart and change it for you, even though we see time and time again in the real world where that doesn't happen. We see people who have accepted Christ still go on to do deplorable things. And we see people who haven't accepted people who rise above and somehow make better choices and better moral decisions about their own character. This belief in the correct doctrine just cannot be the answer. It cannot be the sum total of what makes sense. you enter into moral quandaries like, well, what if Hitler accepted Jesus? What if the most deplorable person you could think of, a rapist, a murderer, a drug lord, what if they accepted Jesus? Just boom, everything that they ever did is just wiped away. They don't have to go through the sorrow, the heartache, the realization, the agony of realizing that what they did hurt other people, maybe prematurely uh, ended their lives, maybe left them with, psychological scars that person will go on to struggle with for the rest of their life. Um, these are things that we all have to wrestle with. If Hitler were to come back to God, he would have to wrestle with that. It wouldn't just be a matter of, oh, well, I accepted Jesus and it's all good now. Or, oh, I accepted Jesus and bada bing, bada boom, wave the magic wand and it's all good. No, it's still, we have to do the work. So this idea to me is just, it's reprehensible. Ranks in my core. All right. I'm going to pause there.